All right, so this is going to be our addendum to the AWS Security Exam walkthrough. We're going to go through some potential questions that you might see on the exam. So just give you an idea of the types of questions you might get, types of answers you might deliver, some explanations about why you might get them. So we'll go through this, and it should take a good amount of time, but let's enjoy and let's learn. Security team suspects a former employee gained unauthorized access to AWS resources in the past 3 months using a compromised access key. What approach would enable the security team to investigate what actions the former employee might have performed within AWS? Use CloudTrail console to search for the user activity and event history. CloudTrail event history provides the most direct method to search for API activity for a specific user within the last 90 days. While CloudWatch logs and Athena can be used for more complex queries of CloudTrail data, and AWS config can track configuration changes, the event history feature in CloudTrail is specifically designed for this type of investigation and provides the most straightforward approach to identifying user activity. A security engineer implemented a vault lock policy for 10 terabytes of data and initiated the vault lock 12 hours ago. The audit team discovered a typo allowing incorrect access to the vault. What is the most cost-effective way to correct this issue? Call the abort vault lock operation, fix the typo, and initiate the vault lock again. When a vault lock is in the in-progress state, which lasts about 24 hours after initiation, you can abort the lock process using the abort vault lock operation. This allows you to fix the policy and restart the process without any data movement costs. Once aborted, you can correct the policy and initiate the lock again. This is significantly more cost-effective than moving 10 terabytes of data. A company wants to control access to AWS resources using identities and groups from their existing Microsoft Active Directory. What must a company create in AWS to map permissions for AWS services to Active Directory user attributes? AWS IAM roles. IAM roles are required for federated access from Active Directory. The company must create IAM roles that can be assumed by federated users. These roles define the permissions that federated users will have in AWS. The federation process involves creating an identity provider in AWS and configuring roles that trust the IDP, allowing Active Directory users to assume these roles based on their attributes. A company has created a cross-account IAM role for a third-party auditor, but the auditor is having trouble accessing some accounts. Which factors may be causing this problem? Answer: the external ID used by the auditor is missing or incorrect. The auditor has not been granted STS assume role permission for the role. The role ARN used by the auditor is missing or correct. So cross-account role assumption requires 1, the correct role ARN to identify which role to assume. 2, STS assume role permission in the trust policy of the target role. And 3, the correct external ID if one is configured for additional security. Password and secret key issues relate to IAM user authentication, not role assumption. EC2 roles are not directly relevant to cross-account auditor access. Compliance requires all communications between on-prem hosts and EC2 instances to be encrypted in transit. Hosts use custom proprietary protocols and need load balancer fronting for availability. Which solution meets these requirements? Route traffic through a TCP listener on a classic load balancer and terminate TLS on EC2 instances. Since the hosts use custom proprietary protocols, not HTTP or HTTPS, an application load balancer cannot handle this traffic. A classic load balancer with TCP listener allows the proprietary protocol to pass through while maintaining end-to-end encryption by terminating TLS on the EC2 instances. This ensures compliance with the encrypted transit requirement. An application is secured with NACLs and security groups. Web servers are in public subnets behind an application load balancer. Application servers are in private subnets. How can edge security be enhanced to protect EC2 instances? Move web servers to private subnets without public IP addresses. Configure WAF to provide DDoS protection for the application load balancer. So moving web servers to private subnets eliminates direct internet access to the instances, requiring all traffic to go through the load balancer. An AWS WAF provides application layer protection and DDoS mitigation when attached to an application load balancer. The NAT gateways would be for outbound traffic from private subnets, not inbound protection. And Bastion hosts would be for administrative access, not application traffic. A security organization needs to restrict root user account capabilities across AWS organization member accounts. How can the administrator restrict root user usage across the organization? Create an organization unit with a service control policy controlling root user usage. The service control policies in AWS organizations can restrict actions, including root user actions, across accounts and an organizational unit. So creating an organizational unit with an SCP that denies certain root user actions and placing operational control accounts in that organizational unit effectively restricts root user capabilities organization-wide. A systems engineer needs to configure outbound mail through SES, Simple Email Service with TLS compliance. Which endpoint and port should the mail application use? email-smtp.us-east-1.amazonaws.com over port 587. The Amazon Simple Email Server's SMTP interface uses that endpoint over port 587 for TLS encrypted SMTP connections. Port 587 is the standard submission port for SMTP with Start TLS encryption. The other options represent POP3 and IMAP protocols, which are for receiving email, not sending it. Risk assessment identified that an internal employee could exfiltrate data from a production server to an external S3 bucket in an account they control. What would mitigate this threat? Use an S3 VPC endpoint with policies allowing only specific S3 buckets in account 1. Block outbound access to public S3 endpoints on the proxy server. An S3 VPC endpoint with a restrictive policy can limit S3 access to only approved buckets within the account, preventing data upload to external buckets, blocking public S3 endpoints at the proxy events, direct internet access to S3 services. NACLs cannot effectively block S3 access due to the dynamic nature of AWS IP ranges, and storing API keys in files increases security risks. Sensitive documents in 3 S3 buckets require unique encryption keys, annual key rotation, and MFA for restricted bucket access. Which solution meets all these requirements? Create a CMK, a customer managed key, for each classification, enable annual rotation, set an MFA policy for restricted customer managed keys, and use an S3 server-side encryption key management system. So the customer master keys with automatic rotation enabled meet annual rotation requirement, and each object encrypted with SSE KMS uses a unique data encryption key, DEK, and the key policy for the restricted CMK can include MFA requirements. An imported key material cannot use automatic rotation, making other options incorrect. EC2 instances and Lambda functions need access to the same RDS database credentials with access logging requirements. What should a security engineer implement? Store your credentials in Secrets Manager. Create an IAM role for EC2 instances and Lambda execution. Secrets Manager is designed for storing and managing database credentials with automatic rotation and access logging. EC2 instances can use instance profiles with IAM roles, while Lambda functions have execution roles. Both can access Secret Manager with proper IAM permissions, and Secrets Manager can provide the required access logging functionality. A company has a CMK with imported key material and requires annual key rotation per policy. How can this policy be implemented? Create a new CMK with a new key material and update the key alias. CMKs with imported key material cannot use automatic key rotation. Manual rotation requires creating a new CMK with new imported key material and updating the key alias to point to the new CMK. This allows applications using the alias to automatically use the new key without code changes. A water utility manages 2,000 Internet of Things devices with unique credentials requiring independent auditability. What is the most cost-effective credential storage solution? Systems Manager Parameter Store with secure string parameters. So Systems Manager Parameter Store provides cost-effective credential storage with built-in encryption using KMS. It includes access logging and is significantly more cost-effective than Secrets Manager for large numbers of static credentials. Parameter Store supports the audit requirement through CloudTrail logging. CloudWatch agents are deployed on Linux EC2 instances, but logging from specific instances is missing. Which troubleshooting steps should be taken? Use EC2 run command to confirm AWS Logs service is running. Verify agent permissions allow log group/stream creation and log events. The most common issues are the CloudWatch logs agent service not running and insufficient IAM permissions. The agent needs permissions to create log groups streams and put log events. EC2 run command can verify service status across multiple instances. CloudWatch logs doesn't write directly to S3 or require UTC time zone. The incident response team needs to audit IAM permissions changes during security events. How can this be accomplished? Use AWS Config to review IAM policies before and after incidents. AWS Config tracks configuration changes to IAM resources, including policies, roles, and users. It maintains a history of configurations, allowing comparison of IAM permissions before and after incidents. Config provides the specific capability to track IAM resource changes over time. A company has network rules too complex for security groups and NACL's limits. What mechanism allows implementing all rules without additional costs? Use operating system host-based firewall. So operating system host-based firewalls like IP tables on Linux can implement complex network rules without additional AWS charges. This approach leverages the existing EC2 compute resources and provides granular control over network traffic at the instance level, bypassing AWS service limits. An IAM user with full EC2 permissions cannot start an instance with encrypted EBS volumes after maintenance. What additional permissions are needed in the IAM policy? KMS create grant and condition bool KMS grant is for AWS resource true. So when EC2 instances use encrypted EBS volumes, EC2s need to decrypt the volumes on behalf of the user. So this requires the ability to create grants with the KMS create grant key value pair, and the condition KMS grants is for AWS resource set to true, which allows grants for AWS services. So these permissions enable EC2s to access the encrypted volumes during instance startup. A website hosted in S3 should be accessible only through CloudFront, not directly via S3 URLs. Which configuration supports this requirement? Associate an origin access identity with the CloudFront distribution and modify S3 bucket permissions so only the origin access identity can access content. See, origin access identity is a CloudFront feature that provides a way to restrict access to S3 content. By associating an OAI with the CloudFront distribution and configuring the S3 bucket policy to allow access only to the OAI, direct S3 access is blocked while maintaining CloudFront access. A Lambda function runs an Athena query on CloudTrail logs in S3, but fails with insufficient permissions error. What is causing the error? The Lambda function typically lacks permissions to access CloudTrail S3 buckets. While the Lambda function has Athena permissions, it can lack the necessary S3 permissions to read the CloudTrail logs that Athena would need to query. Athena would require access to both source data in S3 and the results location in S3. The Lambda execution role needs S3 read permissions for the CloudTrail bucket. A company requires inspection of IP packet data for invalid or malicious content. What approach achieves this requirement? Configure a proxy solution on EC2 and route the outbound VPC traffic through it. Configure a host-based agent on each EC2 instance for inspection. So deep packet inspection requires examining the actual packet payload. A proxy solution can inspect and filter traffic passing through it, while host-based agents can perform intrusion detection and prevention at the instance level. VPC Flow Logs can only capture metadata about traffic, not packet content, and Elastic Load Balancer access logs contain HTTP request information, but not packet-level data. An organization allows remote workers to submit data files of varying sizes. An audit found that files are not encrypted in transit over untrusted networks. Which solution remediates the audit finding with minimal effort? AWS Certificate Manager to provision certificates on Elastic Load Balancer. So Certificate Manager provides the simplest way to provision, manage SSL and TLS certificates for load balancers. By placing an application load balancer with an ACM certificate in front of the web service, all client connections will be encrypted in transit using HTTPS, TLS with a minimal configuration effort. An organization wants to implement KMS key management practices that minimize data exposure from potential future key compromise. Which KMS approach follows key management best practices for minimizing exposure scope? Generate a new customer master key, re-encrypt all existing data, use the new CMK for future operations. So creating a new CMK and re-encrypting all existing data provides the strongest protection against key compromise. Automatic key rotation doesn't affect existing encrypted data, leaving it vulnerable if the original key material is compromised. So a manual key rotation with data re-encryption ensures all data is protected with fresh key material. A security engineer must enforce use of only EC2, S3, RDS, DynamoDB, and STS in specific accounts. What is a scalable approach to meet this requirement? Set up AWS organizations hierarchy and apply service control policy to specific organizational units with a policy like you see here. Okay, so service control policies applied at the organizational unit level provide the most scalable way to restrict AWS service usage across multiple accounts. The SCP acts as a guardrail, preventing users in those accounts from accessing services not explicitly allowed, regardless of their IAM permissions. After migrating RDS credentials to Secrets Manager and enabling 30-day rotation, existing applications fail with authentication errors. What is the most likely cause of authentication errors? Enabling rotation causes immediate rotation, and applications use old credentials. So when rotation is first enabled in AWS Secrets Manager, it triggers an immediate rotation to establish the rotation schedule. This immediately invalidates the current credentials that applications are using, causing authentication failures until applications are updated to retrieve credentials from Secrets Manager. Two EC2 instances in the same VPC but different AZs can communicate via private IPs but not public IPs, despite having internet connectivity. What action allows communication over public IP addresses? Add your public IP addresses to ingress rules of security groups. When EC2 instances try to communicate with their public IP addresses within the same VPC, the traffic is routed through the internet gateway, and security groups must allow inbound traffic from the source instance's public IP address. Adding that public IP address to the ingress rules allows this communication. A web application processing sensitive data needs protection from web exploits for inbound traffic and URL whitelisting for outbound traffic. Which architecture meets these requirements? AWS WAF for inbound scanning, and a third-party solution for outbound restriction. So WAF provides protections against common vulnerability exploits like SQL injections or cross-site scripting attacks. For outbound URL filtering, VPC Flow Logs would only capture network-level information, like IP addresses or ports, not application layer URLs. A third-party proxy or firewall solution from the AWS Marketplace would be needed for URL-based filtering. A static website serving HTML, CSS, and PDF files experiences DDoS attacks. The site needs protection with minimal operational overhead. What is the best protection approach? Move your files to an S3 bucket, create a CloudFront distribution, and terminate the web server. For static content like Amazon S3 with CloudFront, this provides the best DDoS protection with minimal operational overhead. CloudFront's global edge locations absorb DDoS attacks, while S3 provides highly available static hosting. This eliminates the need to manage EC2 instances entirely. After switching from the classic to the application load balancers, users on older devices cannot connect to the website. What is causing the issue? Cipher suites on application load balancers are blocking connections. So application load balancers use a more restrictive set of cipher suites compared to classic load balancers. Old devices may only support legacy cipher suites that are no longer included in the load balancer security policy. This prevents the SSL-TLS handshake completion. A security team needs to record and retain AWS API activity in a centralized location for current and future regions. What is the simplest way to meet these requirements? Create a new CloudTrail trail applied to all regions with a single S3 bucket. So creating a single CloudTrail trail and applying it to all regions automatically captures API activity from current and future regions in one centralized CS3 bucket. This provides the simplest configuration while ensuring comprehensive coverage. An administrator needs to analyze suspicious CloudTrail logs, but is overwhelmed by the volume of audit logs. What approach enables most efficient log searching? Configure Amazon Athena to query CloudTrail S3 buckets for account activities. Amazon Athena provides SQL-based querying capabilities for structured data in S3, making it ideal for analyzing CloudTrail logs efficiently. Athena can quickly filter and analyze large volumes of CloudTrail data using standard SQL queries. Multiple teams place restricted data in S3 buckets that may have been exposed. They need to identify PII objects and determine access history. What solution completes this request? Enable Amazon Macie for data classification. Use research functions for CloudTrail and S3 logs. Amazon Macie is specifically designed to discover and classify sensitive data using PII and S3 buckets. It can identify objects containing PII and provides research capabilities to audit CloudTrail logs and S3 access logs for GET operations on identified sensitive objects. Investigations found API logging was disabled and root user created new API keys that were used multiple times. What could detect and automatically remediate this situation? AWS config rules for CloudTrail is disabled and the root API key creation. And then you use a Lambda for remediation. So AWS config provides rules to detect CloudTrail deactivation and root user API creation. Config rules can trigger Lambda functions for automatic remediation, such as re-enabling CloudTrail and deactivating root API keys. This provides continuous compliance monitoring and automated responses. An application needs resilience across availability zones and regions for KMS encrypted resources. Which approach supports this requirement? Use services that replicate data and rewrap encryption keys with target region CMKs. AWS KMS keys are region-specific and cannot be copied or synchronized. So cross-region resilience requires using the AWS services that handle cross-region replication, like RDS cross-region read replicas, and rewrap the data encryption keys using the target region's CMK while maintaining the same encrypted data. An organization policy requires all encryption keys to be automatically rotated every 12 months. Which KMS key type meets this requirement? A customer-managed CMK with AWS-generated key material. Only customer-managed CMKs with AWS-generated key material support automatic key rotation. AWS-managed CMKs rotate automatically, but on AWS's schedule, not necessarily 12 months. And CMKs with imported key material cannot use automatic rotation and require manual rotation processes. So a security engineer receives an AWS abuse notice listing EC2 instances reportedly abusing other hosts. What actions should be taken? Create EBS snapshots of volumes attached to compromised instances. Capture the memory dump, and then revoke network access except to or from forensics workstations. So the proper incident response would be creating the EBS snapshot to preserve disk state for forensic analysis, capture memory dumps to analyze running processes and memory artifacts, isolate compromised instances by restricting network access to only forensics workstations, and then restarting instances would destroy volatile evidence. Okay? An S3 bucket must meet the following: encryption in transit, encryption at rest, and CloudTrail logging of object retrievals. What configurations do this? Well, specify AWS Secure Transport true in the S3 bucket policy condition. Set up a default encryption for an S3 bucket. Enable API logging of data events for all S3 objects. Secure Transport condition enforces HTTPS SSL for encryption in transit. Default encryption provides encryption at rest. And CloudTrail data events logging captures S3 object level operations, including retrievals. Security groups don't apply to S3, and versioning doesn't address the security requirements. Analyzing a KMS key policy via service condition for workmail and SES. What does this policy allow? So the CMK can be used for encrypting and decrypting only when the principal is example user. Okay? And the request comes from workmail or SES in the specified region. The KMS via service condition restricts key usage requests that originate from the specified AWS services, workmail, and SES in the US West 2 region. Example user can only use this key when the decryption request is made through these services. A KMS key policy statement includes a root account principal. So what does this statement allow? This allows only principals from the account number listed that have IAM policies granting access to this key so that to this key can use this key. When the root account is specified as principal in the KMS key policy, it doesn't give the root user direct access. Instead, it enables IAM policies within that account to grant access to the key. Users still need explicit IAM policies to use the key. A custom reporting service on EC2 Fleet requires centrally collected application logs per security policy. What is the most efficient way to meet this requirement? Install CloudWatch Logs agent on instances to send logs to CloudWatch Logs. The CloudWatch Logs agent is specifically designed for centralized log collection from EC2 instances. It provides reliable, real-time log streaming with built-in retry mechanisms and minimal operational overhead compared to custom solutions. A security engineer needs to determine if AWS service encryption keys comply with regulatory standards. Which action provides compliance guidance? AWS Artifact. Use this to access compliance reports. AWS Artifact provides access to compliance reports, certifications, and attestations that detail how AWS services and their encryption implementations meet various regulatory standards and compliance frameworks. A development team receives errors when encrypting, decrypting, SSM parameter stores, secure string parameters using a customer-managed KMS key. Which CMK-related issues could be responsible? The CMK specified in the application does not exist. The CMK specified in the application is not enabled. So parameter store operations fail when the specified CMK either doesn't exist, so that returns a key not found error, or is disabled and returns a disabled key error. So KMS keys can be referenced by key ID, ARN, or alias. All are valid identifiers. A key being in use doesn't prevent additional operations, as KMS supports concurrent usage. An application published custom metrics to CloudWatch, but after IAM changes, metrics are no longer being reported. What is the least permissive solution to restore metric delivery? Add a CloudWatch put metric data to the IAM policy. So publishing custom metrics to CloudWatch requires only the CloudWatch put metric data permission. This is the most specific and least permissive solution. Logs permissions are for CloudWatch logs, not metrics. CloudWatch full access grants excessive permissions beyond what's needed. A developer's laptop with SSH keys for EC2 instances was stolen. A security engineer blocked port 22 and verified that key hasn't been used. How can a security engineer further protect currently running instances? Use EC2 run command to modify authorized keys files on instances. The EC2 Systems Manager run command can execute commands on multiple instances simultaneously to modify the .ssh authorized keys file and remove the compromised public key. Deleting the key pair from the EC2 console doesn't affect the running instances. The modify instance attribute API cannot change SSH keys on running instances. An application team needs to verify network ACLs and security groups are working correctly across thousands of EC2 instances. How can the requirements be met? Turn on VPC Flow Logs, send this to S3, and query this with Athena. VPC Flow Logs capture network traffic information showing whether traffic is allowed or denied by security groups and network ACLs. This data can be analyzed in Athena to verify network controls are functioning as expected. An inspector focuses on security assessments, not network traffic analysis. An application outputs logs to text files requiring continuous monitoring for security events and incidents with a minimum effort. Which design meets requirements with a minimum effort? Install CloudWatch 8 Logs agent, create a metrics filter, and set up CloudWatch alerts. The CloudWatch Logs agent provides the simplest solution for continuous log monitoring. It streams logs in real time, metric filters can detect patterns for security incidents, and CloudWatch alarms provide automated alerting with a minimal operational overhead. A mobile game needs user authentication, allowing progress saving. Most users have OpenID Connect compatible social media accounts. What is the simplest authentication solution using social media identities? Amazon Cognito. Cognito Identity Pool provides simple integration with OpenID Connect providers using social media sites. Cognito handles the complexity of federated authentication, token exchange, and provides temporary AWS credentials for authenticated users. An EC2 instance connectivity issue despite issues continues despite security groups allowing inbound HTTP from 0.0.0/0. And custom network ACL allows inbound HTTP with no outbound rules. What resolves the connectivity issue? A network ACL needs an outbound rule for ephemeral port range. So the network ACLs are stateless and require explicit outbound rules. So HTTP responses use ephemeral ports from 1024 to 655, 35. So the network ACL needs an outbound rule allowing traffic on the ephemeral port range. Security groups are stateful and automatically allow return traffic. A security engineer needs an automated process to disable an IAM user and access keys older than 3 months. What option should be used? A script using generate credential report, a get credential report, and updating access key APIs. The IAM credential reports APIs provide programmatic access to user credential information, including access key age. A script can generate the report, parse the key ages, and use update access key to disable keys older than 90 days. This provides the most reliable, automated solution. An InfoSec team mandates that only approved AMIs can be used in the future. How can InfoSec ensure compliance with this mandate? Deploy AWS config rules to check running instances for compliance. AWS config rules can continuously monitor EC2 instances and evaluate whether they were launched from approved AMIs. And config provides automated compliance checking and can trigger remediation actions when non-compliant resources are detected. A pharmaceutical company wants to move digitized prescriptions to AWS for analytics, requiring encryption in transit and at rest. Which application flow meets data protection requirements? Digitized files to Kinesis Data Firehose, to S3, to Athena. Kinesis Data Firehose provides encryption in transit and can deliver data to S3 with server-side encryption at rest. And Athena can then query the encrypted data directly from S3. This flow ensures end-to-end encryption while providing analytics capabilities for their prescription data. This KMS key policy allows AWS account root as principal with KMS : actions. What are the effects of this key policy? Okay. When the root account is specified as principal, 1, it enables IAM policies within the account to grant access to the KMS key. And 2, it gives the actual root user full access to the key. The root principal serves dual purposes, enabling IAM delegation and granting root user access. A finance staff in the finance department account needs to read consolidated billing and master pay account without accessing other resources. Which approach grants required permissions without unnecessary access? Create an IAM role in master payer account with view billing permission for finance department users. The cross-account access requires creating an IAM role in the target account, master payer, with the necessary permissions, view billing, and allowing users from the source account, the finance department, to assume that role. This provides least privileged access to only billing information. A web application uses CloudFront, Application Load Balancer, and EC2 US West, Oregon, with encryption from client to CloudFront and CloudFront to load balancer using custom domains. How many ACM certificates are needed and in which regions? 1 in US West and 1 in US East. CloudFront requires certificates to be in the US East region for custom domain names. The ALB requires a certificate in its region, US West, so 2 certificates are needed. 1 in US East 1 for CloudFront and 1 in US West 2 for the load balancer. A single web server not receiving inbound connections while others work properly. The architecture includes network ACLs, security groups, virtual appliance, and application load balancers. Which items should be troubleshooted? Verify the security group applied to the web server's Elastic Network interface, and then verify registered targets in the application load balancer. Each ENI can have different security groups applied. So verifying specific security groups on the problematic service ENI is essential. If the server isn't registered as a target in the ALB or is marked unhealthy, it won't receive traffic. These are instance-specific issues that could affect one server while others work. One needs automated security alerts for too many unauthorized AWS API requests. What approach generates automated alerts for unauthorized API requests? Create a CloudWatch metric filter for API call error codes and implement an alarm. CloudWatch metric filters can parse CloudTrail logs for unauthorized API calls, so error codes like unauthorized operation or access denied, and then create metrics. And CloudWatch alarms on these metrics provide automated alerting when thresholds are exceeded, enabling real-time security monitoring. Multiple production accounts have CloudTrail configured to log to a central S3 bucket, but 2 accounts are not logging anything. What troubleshooting steps should be taken? Verify the S3 bucket policy allows CloudTrail access from production account IDs. Confirm each trail is active and healthy in CloudTrail console. Confirm S3 bucket name is set correctly in CloudTrail console. The S3 bucket policy must explicitly allow CloudTrail from each account to write logs. Trails must be active and healthy to log events. An incorrect bucket name would prevent log delivery. These are the most common causes of CloudTrail logging failures in multi-account setups. CloudWatch log agent successfully delivers logs but stops after log stream is active for specific hours. What steps identify the cause? Ensure the file permissions allow CloudWatch logs agents to read files and verify the operating system log rotation rules are compatible with agent streaming. The file permission changes can prevent the agent from reading log files after rotation or system changes. A log rotation can move or compress files in ways incompatible with the agent's streaming configuration, causing delivery to stop when files are rotated. A company deployed custom DMS server and wants to prevent EC2 instances from using Amazon provided DNS. How can a security engineer block access to an Amazon provided DNS in a VPC? Disable DNS resolution within the VPC configuration. So disabling the DNS resolution in the VPC configuration, you can select enable DNS resolution to false, prevents EC2 instances from using the Amazon provided DNS resolver. This is the most effective method as it disables the DNS provider at the VPC level rather than trying to block specific IP addresses. An employee accidentally exposed AWS access keys during public presentation. The key was immediately disabled. How can the engineer assess impact and ensure credentials weren't misused? Analyze AWS CloudTrail for activity, and then download and analyze a credential report from IAM. The CloudTrail logs all API calls made with AWS credentials, showing exactly what actions were performed with the exposed keys. An IAM credential report shows when access keys were last used, helping determine the timeline of potential misuse. What's the best practice for minimizing a potential attack surface for applications? Which approach minimizes this attack surface? Use security groups for stateful firewalls at the hypervisor level. Security groups provide instance-level stateful firewalling at the hypervisor level, offering the finest granularity for controlling network access. This is a defense in-depth approach at the instance level to provide better attack surface minimization rather than broader network controls. Distributed web applications on EC2 instances in public subnets experiencing intermittent brute force attacks from hundreds of IP addresses at layer 7 over 6 months. 6 months. What is the best way to reduce potential impacts of these attacks? US used AWS WAF with rate limiting rules and IP reputation lists to block malicious traffic at the application layer. The layer 7 brute force attacks require application layer protection. AWS WAF can implement rate limiting, IP blocking, and geographic restrictions more effectively than network level controls. While IPS on instances could work, it lacks centralized management and doesn't scale well. Network ACLs have rule limits and can't effectively handle hundreds of dynamic IP addresses. A company wants to leverage existing on-premises Active Directory as the identity provider for AWS. What steps should be taken to federate on-premises Active Directory with AWS? Create IAM roles with permissions corresponding to each Active Directory group, and then configure Active Directory to add relying party trust between Active Directory and AWS. Active Directory federation requires IAM roles that can be assumed by federated users with permissions mapped to Active Directory groups, and configuring Active Directory federated state As a SAML provider with AWS as a relying party, this enables users to authenticate against Active Directory and assume AWS roles based on their group membership. A security alert for an EC2 instance exhibiting strange behavior. How do you isolate and investigate this? What should be used to isolate and then research this event? 1. AWS CloudTrail for analysis. 2. VPC Flow Log for network traffic analysis. And 3. Security groups for network isolation. So the incident response requires CloudTrail logs to analyze what API calls were made. 2. VPC Flow Logs to examine network traffic patterns. And 3. Security groups to isolate instances by restricting network access while preserving evidence. A financial institution needs separate authentication domains for cloud users while allowing on-premises administrators to access cloud resources. How should the organization manage resources securely? Configure AWS Managed Microsoft Active Directory to manage cloud resources, and then establish a one-way trust from the new Active Directory to the existing on-premises Active Directory. AWS Managed Microsoft Active Directory provides a separate authentication domain for cloud resources. A one-way trust from AWS Active Directory, a resource domain, to an on-premises Active Directory, an account domain, allows on-premises administrators to access cloud resources while preventing cloud users from accessing on-premises systems. Okay. An organization wants alerts for unauthorized port scans, but needs to suppress alerts from authorized security testing in a separate account. How can an authorized security test alerts be suppressed while maintaining unauthorized activity alerts? Add elastic IP addresses of security teams' EC2 instances to trusted IP lists in GuardDuty. So GuardDuty trusted IP lists allow whitelisting of known good IP addresses. IPs on trusted lists don't generate findings, effectively suppressing alerts from authorized security testing while maintaining detection of unauthorized activities from other sources. An organization moving non-critical applications to AWS while keeping mission-critical on-premises. This needs secure connections for limited confidential data sharing with unpredictable internet performance. Which configuration ensures continued connectivity more securely? VPN Gateway over AWS Direct Connect. So VPN Gateway over Direct Connect provides redundant connectivity paths, so Direct Connect for consistent performance and VPN as a backup for internet connectivity issues. The VPN also adds an additional encryption layer for confidential data transmission over the dedicated connection. EC2 instances could retrieve SQS messages before IAM changes, but can no longer access them after changes. Which troubleshooting actions maintain least privilege? Verify SQS resource policy doesn't explicitly deny to the instance role. Verify the role attached to instances contains policies allowing queue access. So IAM troubleshooting requires checking both identity-based policies attached to the role and resource-based policies like the SQS queue policy. So both could prevent access after changes. This approach follows least privilege by checking existing permissions rather than adding excessive access. Hundreds of Docker applications on EC2 need to send logs to central locations for real-time analytics, event replay, and data persistence. Which AWS services together satisfy this use case? Amazon Elasticsearch for real-time analytics and search, and Amazon Kinesis for log ingestion and event replay. So Kinesis data streams can ingest high-volume log data from hundreds of applications and provides event replay capabilities. Elasticsearch and service enables real-time analytics, full text search, and log analysis. Together, they provide scalable log ingestion, analytics, and persistence. One needs a way to automate CloudTrail log encryption using customer master key in KMS. What's the most efficient automated encryption method? Configure CloudTrail to use server-side encryption with KMS managed keys. So CloudTrail natively supports SSE KMS encryption. When configured, CloudTrail will automatically encrypt all log files using the specified CMK before storing them in S3. This provides a seamless automation without requiring custom encryption processes or manual intervention. An organization configured CloudTrail, CloudWatch logs, and CloudWatch alerts for new access keys, but alerts stopped appearing in security operations mailbox. Which action would resolve this? An SNS ensure that the subscription used by these alerts has not been deleted. So CloudWatch alarms typically use SNS to deliver notifications. If alerts were working previously but stopped, the most likely cause is the SNS subscription being deleted, preventing alert delivery to the email endpoint. Then SNS topic and subscription configuration should be verified. One must add content security policy, X-frame options, and X cross-site scripting protection headers to legacy web applications without source code access. Which approach meets this requirement? Implement AWS Lambda add edge origin response functions that inserts required headers. So Lambda add edge functions can modify HTTP responses from origins, including adding security headers. This approach doesn't require application changes and works with legacy applications. The function executes at the CloudFront edge locations and can insert headers before responses reach clients. Some EC2 instances not sending CloudWatch logs during security events. Which troubleshooting steps should be taken? Connect to instances and verify CloudWatch logs agent is running. Verify instances have routes to public AWS API endpoints. So CloudWatch logs require 1, the agent service running on instances to collect and send logs, and 2, network connectivity to AWS APIs, either through Internet Gateway or VPC endpoints. These are the primary failure points for log delivery. Developers adding SSH RDP rules are allowing 0.0.0/0 instead of organizational firewall IP. What is the most efficient remediation approach? Use AWS config rules to detect the open IP and CIDR range and invoke Lambda functions to update security groups with organization firewall IP. So AWS config can continuously monitor security group rules and trigger automated remediation through Lambda functions. This provides real-time detection and automatic correction of non-compliant rules while maintaining proper security posture. CloudFront distribution set up for for S3 buckets after DDoS attacks. Concerns that users might bypass CloudFront and access S3 directly. What prevents users from accessing S3 objects directly via URLs? You set up a CloudFront origin access identity and change the S3 bucket permissions so only OAI has access. So origin access identity, OAI, is a CloudFront feature that provides secure access to S3 content. By configuring the S3 bucket policy to allow access only from the OAI, direct S3 URLs become inaccessible while maintaining CloudFront access. A company wants to authenticate to AWS services using on-prem Active Directory. Which steps enable Active Directory authentication to AWS? Create IAM roles with permissions corresponding to each Active Directory group. Create SAML provider with IAM. Configure the AWS as trusted relying party for Active Directory. So the SAML federation requires 1, IAM roles for federated access, 2, SAML identity provider configured in AWS and IAM, and 3, AWS configured as the relying party in the Active Directory federated state. This enables users to authenticate via Active Directory and assume AWS roles based on SAML assertions. A security analyst is testing monitoring for security group changes, but not receiving CloudWatch alarm alerts, despite configuration. What steps should be performed? Verify that the metric filter was created and mapped to an alarm, and then check the alarm notification action. So CloudWatch alarms for CloudTrail events require 1, a metric filter to parse CloudTrail logs for security of group events, 2, CloudWatch alarms configured with appropriate thresholds, and 3, SNS notification actions properly configured. Missing any component prevents alert delivery. A security team mandates secure deletion of files from encrypted EBS volumes before releasing underlying disks, requiring certification that data is unreadable. Which method ensures data is unreadable? Delete the encryption key used to encrypt the EBS volume, then release volumes back to AWS. Deleting the KMS key that encrypted the EBS volume makes all data on those volumes cryptographically unreadable. Even if the physical storage is recovered, this is the most secure method for ensuring data cannot be accessed after volume release. An S3 bucket policy designed to allow access from specific IP ranges, but an IAM user from an allowed IP receives access denied when downloading objects. What needs to be changed to grant access? Change the resource from the ARN AWS S3 bucket to ARN AWS bucket with a subfolder inclusion with the star. So that /star will do this. Okay, so the resource ARN only applies to the bucket level operations like list bucket, but object operations like get bucket require this additional /star for the folder level to include all objects within the bucket. The policy needs both ARNs for full functionality. An application is storing sensitive data in S3 with object keys containing highly sensitive information in the file name pattern. What is the most secure and cost-effective option to protect sensitive data? Use random S3 object keys and create S3 metadata index in DynamoDB with client-side encrypted attributes. So random object keys prevent data exposure through S3 access logs or URL patterns. DynamoDB with client-side encryption provides secure metadata storage while maintaining queryability. This approach separates sensitive metadata from object storage while ensuring both are protected. CloudTrail is failing to deliver events to S3 as expected during audit. Which initial actions allow CloudTrail event delivery to S3? Choose. 1. You want to verify that S3 bucket policy allows CloudTrail to write objects. 2. You want to verify S3 buckets are defined in CloudTrail exist. So CloudTrail delivery fails typically result from 1. Missing or incorrect S3 bucket policy permissions for the CloudTrail service, or 2. The target S3 bucket doesn't exist. These are the most common misconfiguration issues preventing log delivery. Security engineer must enable encryption with customer-provided keys on a DynamoDB data while retaining full control of encryption keys for compliance. Which DynamoDB features achieves compliance requirements? Use the DynamoDB encryption client to encrypt data prior to uploading the DynamoDB. The DynamoDB encryption client provides client-side encryption, allowing the application to encrypt data before sending it to DynamoDB. This ensures the application retains full control over encryption keys and processes, meeting compliance requirements for customer-controlled encryption. A security engineer must design systems to detect file modifications on EC2 hosts and alerts on changes. What is the most efficient way to meet these requirements? Install host-based IDS software to check for file integrity. Export the logs to CloudWatch Logs for monitoring and alerting. So host-based intrusion detection systems, HIDS, like AIDE or Tripwire can monitor file integrity by creating checksums and detecting changes. Exporting logs to CloudWatch Logs enables centralized monitoring, metric filters for specific events, and automated alerting through CloudWatch alarms. A company has multiple peered VPCs and wants to perform penetration testing of EC2 instances across all VPCs. How can this be accomplished? Deploy pre-authorized scanning engines from the AWS Marketplace into each VPC. Scan instances from local scanning engines. Create VPN connections from data center to each VPC and use on-premises scanning engine. So no penetration test request form would be needed. So AWS allows penetration testing of your own resources without prior approval for many services, including EC2. Pre-authorized scanning engines from the AWS Marketplace or on-premises tools via VPN can be used. The penetration test request form is no longer required for most AWS services. A traditional three-tier web application on EC2 is experiencing increasing malicious attacks from the internet. What steps check for vulnerabilities and limit the attack surface? 1. Review the application security groups to ensure only necessary ports are open. 2. Use Amazon Inspector to periodically scan backend instances. So, security groups should follow least privilege principle, opening only required ports to minimize the attack surface. And then, the Amazon Inspector would provide an automated security assessment scanning for vulnerabilities, unintended network exposure, and security best practices. An organization limits resources to 3 specific AWS regions and needs alerts for resources launched in unapproved regions. Which approach provides alerts for resources in unapproved regions? Developing alerting mechanisms based on processing AWS CloudTrail logs. So CloudTrail logs capture all AWS API calls, including the region where resources are created. Processing CloudTrail logs with CloudWatch metric filters or Lambda functions can detect resource creation events in unapproved regions and trigger alerts through SNS notifications. An application needs to be accessed only by employees, including office workers, remote workers, and travelers. How can a security engineer protect workloads for employee-only access? Use a VPN appliance from AWS Marketplace for user connections. Restrict workload access to traffic from that appliance. A VPN appliance provides a centralized access control for all employees, regardless of location. Employees can connect through the VPN, which provides authenticated encrypted access. And so workload security groups can then restrict access to only traffic originating from the VPN appliance. A virtual security appliance deployed inline needs to route traffic in test environments alongside security groups and network ACLs. What configuration allows virtual security appliances to route traffic? Disable the network source destination check on the security appliance's elastic network interface. EC2 instances by default perform source destination checks, dropping traffic where the instance is not the source or destination. A virtual security appliance must forward traffic between other instances, requiring the source destination check to be disabled on their ENI. A security architect evaluating managed solutions for encryption keys, storage requiring VPC-only access, tamper-evident controls, access logging, and high availability. Which service meets these requirements? Cloud HSM. Cloud HSM provides dedicated hardware security modules in your VPC, offering tamper-evident, tamper-resistant hardware, comprehensive access logging, and high availability across multiple AZs. It meets strict compliance requirements for key storage and management. An AWS account with two S3 buckets. Bucket 1 has a bucket policy allowing user Alice access. Bucket 2 has no policy. User Alice has IAM policies allowing access to bucket 2. Which buckets can user Alice access? Both bucket 1 and 2. So AWS uses policy evaluation logic where access is granted if any of the applicable policy allow it. So Alice can access bucket 1 through the bucket policy and bucket 2 through her IAM policy. Both IAM policies and resource-based policies can grant access independently. Three applications are accessing the same S3 data encrypted with the KMS CMK, and they need individual programmatic access control permissions. What's the recommended method for application-specific permissions? Have each application use a grant on the KMS CMK to add or remove specific access control. A KMS grants provide temporary application-specific permissions that can be created programmatically. Each application can create grants with specific operations and constraints, enabling fine-grained access control without modifying the base key policy. An EC2 autoscaling group managed by CloudFormation needs secure database credential handling with logged retrievals. What is the most efficient way to meet requirements? Store database passwords in AWS Systems Manager parameter store using secure string parameters. Set IAM roles for the EC2 instance profile to allow parameter access. Systems Manager parameter store with secure string provides encrypted credential storage with automatic KMS encryption. IAM roles enable secure access without embedding credentials. Parameter store automatically logs all access attempts for audit purposes. Two AWS accounts, one with VPN to corporate network, and the second hosting Aurora in private subnets with a Bastion host in a public subnet. They need a more secure design. How can security engineers securely set up a Bastion host? Move the Bastion host to the VPC with VPN connectivity. Create VPC peering relationships between the Bastion host VPC and the Aurora VPC. Moving the Bastion host to the VPC with VPN connectivity eliminates public internet access to the Bastion. And VPC peering enables secure communication between the Bastion and the Aurora VPC while maintaining network isolation and leveraging existing VPN infrastructure. A web application experienced volumetric attacks from a mobile gaming bug with a specific user agent string pattern. What mitigation blocks attacks while serving legitimate requests? Create a rule in AWS WAF with conditions that block requests based on the presence of the example attack in the user agent header. So AWS WAF can inspect HTTP headers using including user agent, and create rules to block requests containing specific strings. This provides a surgical blocking of the malicious traffic pattern while allowing legitimate requests with different user agent strings to continue. Sensitive analytics workloads on EC2s are at risk of their subnet being maliciously or accidentally exposed to the internet. Which mitigation should be recommended? Use AWS config to detect whether internet gateway is added and use Lambda function for auto remediation. AWS config can monitor VPC configuration changes and detect when internet gateways are attached to VPCs. Lambda functions can be triggered to automatically remove unauthorized internet gateways, providing continuous compliance and automated protection against internet exposure. A developer is following AWS best practices and needs to encrypt sensitive data locally using AWS KMS and decrypt it when required. What's the simplest and most secure way to decrypt data when required? Store the encrypted data key alongside the encrypted data. Use the decrypt API to retrieve the data key to decrypt data when required. So AWS best practice is to use an envelope encryption. So generate the data key with the generate data key, encrypt the data locally, store the encrypted data key with the encrypted data, then erase the plain text key. For decryption, use the KMS decrypt API to recover the data key, then decrypt it locally. Okay. A university EC2 instance shared among students with non-root SSH access. The administrator is concerned about students attacking other AWS resources via metadata service. What protects against this potential attack? Disable the EC2 instance metadata service. The EC2 instance metadata service can be disabled to prevent access to instance credentials and metadata. This prevents students from accessing IAM credentials or other sensitive information available through the metadata service while maintaining normal instance functionality. EC2 instances behind the ELB classic load balancer has been compromised. You need to limit lateral movement and allow evidence gathering. What techniques limit lateral movement and allow evidence gathering? Remove an instance from the load balancer, shut down access by tightening the security group. So if you remove the instance from the load balancer, this stops new connections while tightening security groups isolates the instance for investigation. This preserves the instance for forensic analysis while preventing lateral movement and stopping the instance from serving malicious content. The development team expects hundreds of master keys and doesn't want to manage access control for individual CMKs. What allows managing KMS permissions in IAM without editing individual key policies? A newly created CMK must have key policies that allows a root principal to perform all actions. When a KMS key policy includes the root principal with full permissions, it enables IAM policies within the account to grant access to the key. This allows centralized permission management through IAM without requiring individual key policy modifications. An EC2 instance in an auto-scaling group is behind the application load balancer and is suspected to be compromised. What steps should be taken to investigate? Initiate the EBS volume snapshots of all volumes on the EC2 instance. Deregister the EC2 instance from the application load balancer and detach it from the auto-scaling group. Attach the security group with restrictive ingress-egress rules to the instance. So the proper instance response would be creating those snapshots for forensic analysis, isolating the instance from production traffic while preventing auto replacement, and then applying restrictive security groups to prevent lateral movement while preserving evidence. A company with 5 AWS accounts wants centralized CloudTrail logging in a new account with unique prefixes and modification detection. Which steps implement these requirements? Choose new S3 buckets in a separate account for centralized storage and enable log file validation on all trails. Apply bucket policy to centralized S3 buckets, permitting CloudTrail service to use S3 put object and S3 get bucket echo actions, and then use unique log file prefixes for trails in each AWS account. So centralized CloudTrail requires a dedicated S3 bucket with log file validation for integrity checking. Then, a proper bucket policy allowing CloudTrail cross-account access, and a unique prefix to organize the logs by account. This enables centralized security monitoring with tamper detection. Security engineering, a security engineer implements a solution for seamless S3 encryption without direct key handling, requiring high scalability and ability to immediately delete encryption keys. Which solution meets these requirements? Use KMS with the AWS imported key material and then use delete imported key material API to remove key material if necessary. The KMS with imported key material allows immediate deletion of a key material using the delete imported key material API, making encrypted data immediately inaccessible. This provides the immediate deletion capability while maintaining the scalability and seamless encryption features of KMS. Cognito application needs mechanisms to mark customers as suspended while allowing logins but preventing changes. Which approach reduces complexity and avoids future security issues? Move suspended customers to a second Cognito group and define appropriate IAM access policies for the group. So Cognito groups provide role-based access control through different IAM policies. Suspended users can be moved to a group with read-only IAM permissions, allowing authentication while preventing modifications. This leverages native Cognito features without application logic changes. An EBS volume and S3 bucket encrypted with the same KMS key. A former employee scheduled CMK deletion, which has now been deleted. Which steps address this situation? Copy the data directly from the EBS encrypted volume before the volume is detached from the EC2 instance. When the KMS key is deleted, the encrypted data becomes inaccessible after the grace period expires. If the EBS volume is still attached and the instance is running, data may still be accessible in memory or through the instance's cache before the volume is detached and the key deletion takes full effect. A Lambda function is misused to alter data. A security engineer cannot find the logs in CloudWatch logs to identify who invoked the function and the output produced. Why are the logs not available? The execution role for the Lambda function did not grant permissions to write log data to CloudWatch logs. So Lambda functions require specific IAM permissions to write logs to CloudWatch logs. Without logs create log group or logs create log stream or logs put log events permissions in the execution role, the function cannot create or write to log streams in CloudWatch logs. An EC2 instance is attempting to communicate with command and control server, but is failing. A network audit shows this activity, but guard duty doesn't alert. Why did guard duty fail to alert? Because guard duty does not see these DNS requests. So guard duty analyzes DNS logs from the AWS DNS resolver. If instances use custom DNS servers like on-prem Active Directory servers where the DNS requests don't go through the AWS DNS infrastructure, guard duty cannot analyze these requests and won't generate DNS-based findings. A Lambda function cannot retrieve secure string parameters from Systems Manager Parameter Store, which is receiving an access denied error. Which action resolves the access denied error? Add a policy to the role that the Lambda function uses, like allowing KMS decrypt for the KMS key. Secure string parameters are encrypted with KMS. The Lambda execution role needs both SSM get parameter permission and KMS decrypt permission for the KMS keys used to encrypt the parameter. A missing KMS permission causes access denied errors. A security policy requires VPC flow logs on all VPCs. A security engineer needs to automate the compliance auditing. Which combinations of actions should be taken? Create an AWS Lambda function that determines whether flow logs are enabled for a given VPC, and create AWS config custom rules and associate with the Lambda function containing the evaluation logic. AWS config custom rules can evaluate compliance using Lambda functions. The Lambda function checks VPC configurations for flow logs enablement, and config can trigger evaluations when VPC configurations change, providing automated compliance monitoring. A security engineer wants to control access to the data encrypted under CMK and use additional authenticated data to prevent ciphertext tampering. Which action provides the required functionality? Use KMS encryption context as a condition when defining IAM policies for CMK. The encryption context in KMS serves as additional authenticated data, AAD, and can be used in IAM policy conditions. So the KMS encryption context condition key allows policies to grant or deny access based on the encryption context values. This provides fine-grained access control and tamper protection. An application on EC2 with an IAM role receives an HTTP 403 access denied when accessing the S3 object. What steps would troubleshoot this issue? Verify the KMS key policy allows decrypt access for the IAM principal if the object is encrypted. Check the S3 bucket policy for statements that deny access to objects. And then confirm the IAM role associated with the EC2 instances has proper privileges. So S3 access requires multiple permissions layers. A KMS permissions if objects are encrypted, S3 bucket policies that don't explicitly deny access, and an IAM role permissions for S3 operations. Security groups don't affect S3 access as it uses HTTPS API calls. A security engineer must implement mutually authenticated TLS connections between containers and VPCs. Which solution is most secure and easy to maintain? Use AWS Certificate Manager, Private Certificate Authority, ACM PCA, to create subordinate certificate authority. Then use AWS Certificate Manager to generate private certificates and deploy to all containers. So ACM PCA provides managed private certificate authority infrastructure, while ACM handles certificate lifecycle management, including automatic renewal. This combination provides enterprise-grade mutual TLS with minimal operational overhead and strong security through managed security certificate authority. A third-party firm given a cross-account role access. A security engineer concerned about the role ARN being compromised by their customers. What would prevent this outcome? Request an external ID from the company and add a condition with STS external ID to the role's trust policy. External ID provides additional security for cross-account roles by requiring a secret value only known to the trusted party. Even if the role ARN is discovered, it cannot be assumed without the correct external ID, preventing unauthorized access from other customers. An S3 bucket with sensitive data must use AWS KMS CMK with automatic annual key rotation. How should the bucket be configured? Select Amazon S3 AWS KMS Managed Encryption Keys, SSE KMS, and select Customer Managed CMK when key rotation is enabled. So SSE KMS with Customer Managed CMK provides full control over encryption keys. Customer Managed CMKs support automatic annual key rotation when enabled, and meeting the requirements for yearly rotation while maintaining customer control over the encryption process. An IAM user is unable to download objects from a KMS encrypted S3 bucket via Management Console, while other users can. What policies should be reviewed and modified? The CMK policy, the S3 bucket policy, and the IAM policy. The S3 object access with KMS encryption requires permissions in 3 places. 1. The CMK policy must allow KMS decrypt. 2. The S3 bucket policy must allow S3 get object. And 3. The IAM policy must include both S3 and KMS permissions. All 3 policy layers must permit access. A security engineer wants to provide the highest level of security for AWS account root users. What should be done to provide the highest security level? Create a new IAM user with administrator permissions. Enable multi-factor authentication for the AWS account root user. So the AWS security best practices recommend creating an IAM user for daily operations while securing the root user with MFA. This provides a separation of duties and adds an authentication factor to the most privileged account, significantly improving security posture. A web application using S3, API Gateway, and DynamoDB needs to authenticate users from existing SAML identity provider directory. Which combination of actions enables user authentication and API calls? Configure a SAML identity provider in Amazon Cognito to map attributes to Cognito user pool attributes. Configure SAML identity providers to add Amazon Cognito user pools as relying parties. And then update the API gateway to use Cognito user pools to the authorizer. So the SAML integration requires Cognito user pool configured with a SAML ID provider for user authentication, a SAML ID provider configured to trust Cognito as a relying party, and an API gateway configured to use Cognito user pools for authorization of API calls. A ping from an on-prem to an EC2 instance fails. Flow logs show inbound ICMP accept and outbound ICMP reject. What action allows ping to work? And security groups of the EC2 instance allow the outbound ICMP traffic. The flow logs show the inbound ping is accepted, but outbound response is rejected. Security groups are stateful, but the outbound rule might be missing. So the ICMP ping requires both inbound ICMP, so the echo request, and outbound ICMP, the echo reply, to be allowed in the security group. A Java application on EC2 communicates with RDS using the username and password. You need to protect the credentials while minimizing downtime during rotation. Which combination protects credentials and minimizes rotation downtime? Configure automatic rotation of credentials in AWS Secrets Manager, and then configure the Java application to catch connection failures and call Secrets Manager for updated credentials when the password is rotated. So the Secret Manager provides automatic credential rotation with RDS integration. And then two, the application level retry logic ensures seamless credential updates without manual intervention. This combination provides both security and high availability during credential rotation. A central security account needs to monitor S3 bucket policy compliance across production accounts based on data classification tags. Which combination builds the required solution? Configure CloudWatch events in production accounts, send all S3 events to security account event bus. Configure CloudWatch events rule in security account to detect S3 bucket creation or modification events. Invoke the Lambda function in security account to analyze S3 bucket settings and send non-compliance notifications. Cross-account event monitoring requires 1. CloudWatch events in the production accounts to forward S3 events to a central security account, and then 2. CloudWatch events rule in the security account to process S3 events, and finally, a Lambda function to analyze bucket policies against data classification and alert on non-compliance. A company migrating sensitive data to S3 needs encryption at rest. The solution must enable companies to generate their own keys without managing key storage or encryption process. What should the security engineer use? Server-side encryption with AWS KMS managed keys, SSE KMS. So SSE KMS with customer managed CMKs allows companies to control key generation and policies while AWS manages the encryption process and secure key storage. This provides customer control over keys without the operational complexity of managing encryption infrastructure. A newly developed product needs appropriate access controls for CloudTrail events while protecting against tampering and unauthorized access. Which combination protects against tampering and unauthorized access? Ensure the log file integrity validation mechanism is enabled. Ensure the system's administrators and developers with job-related need to know can view but not modify logs. 1. CloudTrail log validation provides cryptographic proof of log integrity, detecting tampering attempts, and 2. Read-only access follows least privilege principle, allowing necessary troubleshooting while preventing log modification that could hide malicious activity. So this is the end of part 1. We're going to have several more parts that will go over more questions, answers, and explanations. I hope you enjoy this, and you'll join me for the next one. Have a good day.